Thank you for keeping it Citizen Weekend. Right from Kenya's independence, the occupants of the office of the Vice President or Deputy President, as it is now known, haven't enjoyed smooth sailing. And while things may have changed with a joint presidential ticket, the more they stayed the same. What is the cure then when the presidency is pulling in different directions? A matching set. Before there was Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto's matching red ties, there was Jomo Kenyatta and Jaramogi Oginga Odinga, Kenya's first president and vice president, in their matching beaded caps. But the love affair in both cases was not to stand the test of time. A difference in ideology setting Kenyatta and Odinga on a collision course on whether to set Kenya on the socialist path or a capitalist one. In his book, Not Yet Uhuru, Jaramogi, writing of his humiliations as vice president. On United Nations Day 1965, I was present at the commemorative meeting when a minister appeared to represent the president and to take the salute in the presence of myself as vice president. Ultimately, Odinga backed into a corner by the 1966 Limuru Conference, where his influence in the ruling party was diminished with the creation of 8 vice chairpersons, forcing him to resign as vice president, and leading to the creation of the Kenya People's Union and a festering of hostilities that led to the Kisumu massacre of 1969, when a visit by Jomo Kenyatta on the hills of Tom Mboya's death turned bloody. It is a theme that has reverberated throughout Kenya's history. Kenya's second president, Daniel Toroitich arap Moi too, suffered humiliating scenes when he served as Kenyatta's second in command. Frustrated by the so-called Kiambu Mafia, there was even an attempt to change the constitution to prevent the VP from automatically assuming office in the event of the president's death. There were at least 2 documented incidents of his being slapped in front of President Kenyatta at State House Nakuru by then Rift Valley Provincial Police Commissioner James Mungai. Those who served under Moi as vice president could not rest on their laurels either. George Saitoti, Moi's longest-serving VP, found himself in the political cold after the 1997 general election, when Moi left him hanging for over a year when he failed to reappoint him as his second in command after 8 years of serving as his deputy. He also suffered a rude shock when he suffered a fate similar to Jaramogi's, and it became clear during the KANU National Delegates Conference of March 18th, 2002, that the ambitions he harbored to succeed Moi were not shared. Kalonzo Musyoka could commiserate with Saitoti as he too failed to secure a much-coveted endorsement from successor Mwai Kibaki, who had himself served as vice president under Moi. A whole constitutional dispensation later, and the divisions that saw Uhuru Kenyatta campaign against his deputy William Ruto as successor now dog the Ruto-Gachagua administration less than 2 years in office, with Gachagua's staff under scrutiny in connection with the month-long protests that shook Ruto's administration to its foundation, and with a reported plot in the offing for Gachagua's impeachment. All right, as I mentioned earlier, I am joined in studio by historian Professor Macharia Monene. We also have joining us from across the pond, as it's referred to at times, is Professor David Mwanda, and he is a political scientist. I'll start with you, Professor Macharia Monene. What do you make of that report? Has there been a thread running right through independence where those who occupy the seat of the deputy president or vice president are often frustrated men?
Well, they appear to be frustrated. But what usually happens is when there is a difference of opinion as to which direction the country should go. That was the initial problem, actually, between Jomo Kenyatta and Jaramogi. It was a time of anxiety. Kenya was just coming from a very rough period, the Mau Mau War, and there was concern everywhere whether there will be violence now that the supposed leader of the Mau Mau was becoming president. And what you had was a lot of effort by people, the new team, to prove that they are not going to behave like the Mau Mau. And so there's no revolutionary rhetoric at all. That's one side. Then you have another group that was saying the way things are, you've been so much under the Western influence that you need to change direction to balance up. And maybe there was a lot of talk about socialism, a lot of talk. And the question was, will Kenya go socialistic way or will it go capitalistic way? Now, Kenyatta and his team, which included Tom Mboya, Kibaki, Moi Kibaki, and Ngaine, and Sagini, a whole team, were nowhere anywhere near socialist in their mind or in reality. And you have here another team saying we need to recognize the revolutionary legacy of the Mau Mau, so which was scaring people. So we had that ideological argument. In fact, very few of those people were socialists in reality. Jaramogi was not a socialist, but he talked it, a few one or two. So the issue was which direction should the country go. And that's where Kenyatta and Jaramogi quarreled. Okay.
And the next stage then would be, although there was it Murumbi who came in after Jaramogi?
Yes.
And then thereafter we had Daniel Toroitich Arap Moi.
Yes.
But for Daniel, Professor Mwanda, I was surprised to learn that there was a police commissioner who reportedly slapped him at least twice, that he would be stopped at roadblocks, that he would be kept waiting when going to see the president. Why do we have this history of, quote unquote, the president's men frustrating those who occupy the office as the second in command?
So I think you need to understand the historical context of the time, because you know, the post-independence period was really very much about Kenyatta and Kenyatta consolidating his rule. And there was a strong feeling within the cabal that was around Jomo Kenyatta that you know, the country, you know, the rulership of the country should not leave central Kenya, right? Should not leave the mountain. So part of that ethnic chauvinism is then encapsulated in this kind of disrespect to the Vice President Daniel Moi. Also, don't forget that a lot of these elites, the Kikuyu elites that were around President Kenyatta, really looked down on Daniel Moi as a passing cloud, not only because he was considered from a small ethnic community in Rift Valley, the Tugen, but also that his level of education, his preparation for the job, they just didn't feel was up to par. So there's a lot of effort to not only frustrate him, but to humiliate him. And this is then, you know, brought forward with the Change the Constitution movement in the latter years of Kenyatta's presidency, when it looked like Kenyatta was, you know, becoming senile, he was getting old, and he wasn't very much in control of his facilities. There was this strong move to change the constitution to ensure that power would not leave Mount Kenya. So it's a whole variation of these dynamics, and strong ethnic dynamic, but also very much a personality and an elite dynamic, where people look down on Moi as not having the academic, intellectual, and bourgeoisie gravitas to mingle it out with the elites in Kenya.
You disagree, Professor Macharia?
Well, not entirely. But, see, it's a big narrative. Yeah? There were movements to change the constitution whenever it was felt that Kenyatta was about to go. So what happened in the 70s was actually a repeat of what happened in the late 60s. And if you look at the constitution, the way it was crafted in 1964, the Republican Constitution, it was essentially anti-Jaramogi. And the reason was because Kenyatta was supposed to die anytime. And the question was who will take over when he dies. Initially it looked at it as if it was a contest between Jaramogi and Tom Mboya. And Mboya was in charge of the constitution just before the Republican status. And the constitution made it very clear that should there be a vacancy, the sitting vice president will not become the automatic president or acting, whatever. Now, that, when Jaramogi was kicked out or shown the door, and he went to create his own party, then the attitude gravitated around now, what did the Constitution say? Because in 1967 or 68, Kenyatta had a heart attack. And there was a question was, who is going to take over? And the way it was, Mboya was going to take over. By persuading Parliament and persuading the cabinet, because he could talk, the guy could talk. So they changed the Constitution. And who was sitting at the vice presidential place? Moi was sitting there. And it says, now should that happen, the sitting vice president will be acting president for 3 months. And then you can have an election. It was, 68 was the really serious issue because it did change the Constitution. Then, once Moi was sitting there, a few years later, again it looked as if Kenyatta was going, eh? And so you had that, what? Movement of which failed. People were reminded about what failed, not what succeeded. In 68 it succeeded. In 75, 76 it failed. And there is debate which side was Kenyatta on this issue. There is a big debate. Kenyatta was always for Moi. And there are stories you can tell about it, that when he looked at the people around him, the jokers, he had not, he thought Moi was a better what? So Moi was a very crafty politician. He had been in parliament longer than anybody, from 1955. All the others found him there. So he knew how to play games. And even when he was Home Minister for Home Affairs and Jaramogi was the Vice President, he himself used to harass Jaramogi.
Really?
Yes. So, I mean, it's... so
in what sense?
See, even an aeroplane can be told to stop for a while. So,
oh, okay, I get it.
So, you know, I mean, there are those things that were happening. So it's a problem that was there. And so what I'm saying is that Moi was a very crafty politician. He knew how to play his game. What people talk about, 76, was just a repeat that failed. Because there was a serious change in the Constitution in 1968. The one that abolished independent candidates. The one that said that you must be a member of a political party in order to do what? To be a candidate. The one that introduced detention without trial. The one that they even tried to change the age for becoming president from 35 to 40, because Tom Mboya was about 39. So then they took, wait a minute, what are you people doing? So that changed the Constitution, succeeded. Mm-hmm. The one people talk about but failed.
Okay, Professor Monda, you'd like to come in at that point?
Sure. I think whereas that is true, ultimately politics is about power. And if we really think about that, the period, for example, 68 that Dr. is talking about, we have to understand there were three dynamics going on. There was the ideological competition between Jaramogi and Mzee Kenyatta. There was a personality conflict between the two of them because Jaramogi felt as much of a national leader as Jomo, but there was also the broader question of the ethnicity, the ethnic component between Jaramogi and Jomo Kenyatta. So yes, there were obviously changes to change the constitution, but those changes to change the constitution were to maintain the hegemony of a particular ethnic group from a particular region, in the event also of consolidating power for Jomo Kenyatta. Because at that time, in the late 60s, the move to have 8 vice presidents was to weaken the influence of Jaramogi. But also, it was the ethnic dynamic was also to weaken the influence of the Luo nation, which was seen to be in direct conflict or in competition with elites from Central Province. So we have to really think about that centralization of power that Jomo Kenyatta was involved in, not only in terms of constitutional changes to ensure there was no VP, but those constitutional changes are being done for a purpose. And we know in Kenya, we organize around ethnic constituencies. So as much as you change the constitution, you're not just changing it to make a Republican constitution more centralized in terms of power of the president, but you are ultimately entrenching power to safeguard the interests of a dominant elite. And we know at independence, this dominant elite was from Central Kenya. And it's replicated in terms of the 70s and the later 70s when you think about the land schemes and who got land in Rift Valley, which is part of the problem of the land redistribution we have today. You think about it in terms of the cabinet appointments, but then you later think about it also in terms of elites then looking later to change the constitution in the late 70s to attempt to ensure that power remained within the elites. And it happened that those elites were from Central Kenya. And lastly, I might add that out of the 12 vice presidents we've had, 5 have been from Central Kenya. So this really tells you that this is a very key constituency for whoever's going to be president. You have to have your pinballs correctly aligned in Central Kenya, or you need to split the vote of that region in order to make to continue in power. And that's something Daniel Mo is very good at doing.
All right. We'll continue the conversation and the parallels that we can draw to the events of today. On the other side of this break, we continue. Professor Macharia Munene, Professor David Monda.